Hello, Trauma Thrivers, and welcome. And today I am delighted beyond measure to introduce to you all to Mark Brayne, who I know and have trained with, and I'm very grateful for joining us here today. Mark was a former foreign correspondent with the BBC, and he's now an accredited consultant in EMDR and a psychotherapist who specialises in trauma, anxiety, depression, and relationships. And Mark also runs EMDR Focus and trains other therapists and has supervisees as well. And he's developed an amazing protocol, which I was guinea pig for once on one of the trainings, on intergenerational trauma and EMDR. So we really are incredibly lucky to have some of your valuable time today, Mark. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
And really to find out a little bit more, if it's okay, about EMDR today, but starting with your journey. How did you get into therapy from being a foreign correspondent? That's quite an interesting move.
It's actually the same job, Lou, because you sit down and listen to people and try and make sense of a story. The difference being in psychotherapy, you don't have to put it on the 6 o'clock news and you get to discover what happens next when you meet them again next week.
Yes.
But how I got into psychotherapy was marital breakdown was quite a useful trigger when I hit midlife crisis, and let's not go into the detail.
This is your marital breakdown with Jutta, who you're now back married.
That's right. It's been a bit of with Jutta with a J-U, Jutta. We met in Moscow in 1974, when I was with Reuters, just starting out in my journalistic career, and married in 1977, hit the buffers in 1991 for various reasons, as happens in midlife.
Yes.
She divorced me in 2000 when I was writing my master's thesis on the personal experience of the foreign correspondent as seen from a psychotherapeutic perspective.
Wow.
So she divorced me appropriately. I had to take it on the chin. But 13 years later, having meanwhile been married to somebody else, another psychotherapist, as it turns out, and we set up the DART Centre for Journalism and Trauma, working with journalists and trauma through the noughties.
Okay.
And taking trauma training and awareness to the BBC and lots and lots of news organisations internationally. In 2013, I thought, what's the English for sod this for a game of soldiers? And left my second wife, went back to my first wife, moved in with my mother, then in her late 80s, mid 80s, and said to my first wife, will you marry me again? She took 6 months to say yes, but she said yes on the top of Machu Picchu. I jest not. And we are now basically living happily ever after. And she is also an EMDR consultant.
Yes, who I actually have trained with too.
And you've trained with her? Yes, we co-train. Yeah. So there you go. That's my crazy trauma story in a nutshell.
That's an amazing trauma story. I'm sorry about the noise. If anybody's hearing any noise in the background, I'm afraid I've got Alfie with me, who is trying to make himself very comfortable on a little mat I've got down here. In case
I think he wants to be the centre of attention, actually.
I think he always wants to be on camera.
Yeah.
So how long have you been a therapist now?
I was discussing this actually with a client earlier today. The journey, how does one get there? So, midlife crisis at age 41. Went to Findhorn, the Findhorn Foundation.
Yes.
In '94, 3 years later, the lights went on, and I came away from Findhorn saying I've got to train in this thing called psychotherapy, and signed up for a fundamentals course at the CCPE, the Centre for Counselling and Psychotherapy Education, Transpersonal Psychotherapy Training, integrative really.
And for those that don't know, could you elaborate a little bit on transpersonal therapy and what it means?
Gosh, yes.
Just very loosely, because we've got quite a mixture in the Trauma Thrivers group of professionals and lay people.
Well, there's an awful lot one could say, but in principle, if you think of therapy started out with psychodynamic, if you like, with Freud, and then psychoanalysis with Jung. Then Rogers came along, person-centered, and then CBT turned up in the late 60s, which has its place, makes it more accessible. Does it work? Well, that's another story. And then, if you like, transpersonal is the third wave, where you move beyond the relationship, beyond the left brain cognitive behavioral stuff into an awareness that we are part of something bigger.
Yes.
Now, I'm personally not religious. I could perhaps say I'm faintly spiritual. I am Asperger's as well, recently diagnosed as Asperger's. We'll get to that. So I have a sort of slightly distinctive take on the world. But the transpersonal, as I understand it and experience it, just sees us in the context of, if you like, the universe.
Yeah.
We are all, as Joni Mitchell famously sang at Woodstock, we are stardust.
Yeah.
We go back to the beginning of time. Each one of us, we're made up of the constituent bits of the universe. We are energy. We are an energy system.
Yes.
And we are the product and the expression of, as Cahill Gibran says, life's longing for itself.
Yes.
Which is a lovely way of understanding life.
I love.
So the transpersonal just enfolds. There's something bigger than just egos and psyches and so on. But we are, if we understand ourselves as sitting on 3.5 billion years of evolution of life on the planet, 14 billion years of the universe since the Big Bang, and there's something bigger going on.
Yeah.
Awful, most of which we haven't a clue. We don't understand.
Yeah.
So just ride with it, and the most amazing things happen. Now, when I call my EMDR training "Unleash Your EMDR, Release the Magic."
Yes.
And if you like,
magic,
transpersonal psychotherapy is a kind of magic, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. And so you did all of that training in transpersonal, and then something led you down the EMDR route.
I started out on the EMDR route about 3 years after I graduated, 4 years after I graduated. I was going through another major life crisis in my mid-50s. I was moving house and moving job, leaving the BBC, and I'd started up a new marriage, and I was in a bit of a state.
Right.
And I was going to conferences in the States of the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, ISTSS, as part of developing the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was hobnobbing with Bessel van der Kolk and all the luminaries of the trauma field. It was absolutely fabulous. God, I loved it.
Yeah, I can
imagine. They were presenting their research and just circulating with them at cocktail parties and dinners. And so I really got to know some of these guys.
Yeah.
And just the lights went on. I thought, this is just
phenomenal.
Trauma is at the heart of the dysfunctions that people bring into psychotherapy.
Yeah.
And then I was going through a bad old time, and I said to a colleague, I rather like the look of this EMDR. Can you recommend anybody? And this was a lady called Kerstin Berg Johansson in Sweden, who's now Sweden's EMDR trainer. Right. And she said, why don't you get in touch with Richard Mitchell in the UK, who trains EMDR, basic EMDR. So I went to him for some sessions. And the amazing thing was, Lou, he was showing me eye movement, just left, right eye movement. He was just saying, this is what we're going to do to install a safe place, to use EMDR jargon. And he did a couple of passes and I fell into his lap. Extraordinary. I lost body tone. I was in such grief that I collapsed into his arms.
Wow.
And I thought, oh my goodness, there's something going on here. This bilateral movement, this bilateral stimulation
is powerful.
It's just powerful.
Yeah.
So then I did some sessions with him, sorted a few things out, not everything.
Yeah.
And so I need to train in this. So I trained in basic EMDR in 2004, went through parts 1, 2, and 3, and then worked my way on upwards to practitioner in 2009, then consultant in 2011.
Wow.
And then Laurel Parnell in attachment-focused EMDR in 2014. And the rest, as they say, is history, really. Okay.
And for the lay person who's watching, what would you say EMDR, how would you describe it to somebody that didn't know what it was, that was new to trauma therapy, was new to understanding potentially that trauma was their issue? Because I think what I'm picking up from you, and certainly in my experience with myself, is it took me a long time, even of being a therapist, to kind of realize that underneath it all, trauma was really my thing, as well as the thing that I wanted to teach.
Absolutely. Trauma, the trouble with trauma, and the word trauma, coming from a journalistic background, dealing with really big international stuff, Cold War,
Yeah.
Romanian Revolution, Yugoslav civil wars, earthquakes, tsunamis, child soldiers in Africa.
Yeah. I mean,
I only covered a small part of that sort of
but
stuff.
I can only imagine what it's like and what it's like being a foreign correspondent for people.
The foreign correspondent work that I did was mainly political. I was on Tiananmen Square in the spring of 1989, although left Beijing before the tanks went onto the square. It was a very, very, very big story, but I did cover the Romanian Revolution, where people were being shot at rather nastily and people were dying around me.
Yeah.
But on the whole, my story was covering the Cold War, which was not a fighting war.
Right.
But the trouble with trauma is that so many people say, well, I haven't been through trauma because I haven't covered a war, I haven't been in an earthquake, I've not been raped or whatever, or I haven't even had a major car accident. But Francine Shapiro, the inventor of EMDR, which actually pulls together a whole bunch of different experiences, there's actually nothing new under the sun. People have been using bilateral stimulation since the dawn of time to work through trauma, and drumming, dancing, running, and whatever. She differentiated between what she called big T trauma and little t trauma. And as time went on, in psychotherapy, I realized that actually every single person I've ever worked with in psychotherapy, in effect, presents with trauma.
Yeah.
If one understands the key, because your question is about what's EMDR, but if we understand trauma as informing pretty much every presentation, every dysfunction, almost every psychological syndrome.
Yes.
ADSD. ADSD today. That's ADHD.
Yeah.
Depression, anxiety, OCD. You name it. Even psychosis and schizophrenia to some extent.
Well, I would agree, having been psychotic.
Right, you've been psychotic, so you know that from the inside.
Yeah.
But if we understand all of these stories as informed by experiences at key developmental junctures in life, where the individual, you, me, whoever, has been through an experience that was so overwhelming that it couldn't be metabolized and properly digested at the time by the nervous system, which means, in my case, my parents' divorce when I was 11, moving house when I was 3.5, the arrival of my little brother when I lost my special relationship with my mother. In my case, being Asperger's and not knowing it till I was 70, literally, or 69. I had the diagnosis just before my 70th birthday, just a couple of months ago. So all of these experiences put us in life overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And we learn to deal with it. We deal with it, but in dysfunctional ways. We might shut down. We might become hyperactive. We might become workaholics. And later we might start doing substance abuse. So whatever the dysfunction, usually it's got its, 99 times out of 100, it's got its roots in evolutionary overwhelm.
I would agree.
So in other words, when the system is stressed beyond its capacity to deal with what's happening, and that means that the system, the nervous system, gets stuck with emotions, thoughts, and physical sensations. So when we're working with trauma, Lou, and you know this in your work, we're working with the person at the age they were when the trauma happened.
Yeah.
So if it's a traumatic birth, we're working with a neonate. If it's a 3-year-old who was suddenly cast into outer darkness when their sibling arrived, and the parents and the mother's attention switched to a new member of the family, and the 3.5-year-old felt completely excluded and bereft and never told anybody because the family system didn't talk about emotions and there was no soothing. So what's happened? You've got a fundamental rupture of myself being safe in the world, which means I go into survival mode, which means I've got a version of fight, flight, freeze, flop, friend, the 5 Fs.
Yeah, I agree.
Running as my fundamental response to stress.
Yes.
And the bigger the stress in later life, the more likely it is I default back to my earliest programming.
Yeah.
Whether that happened at birth, 3.5, 7, 13. So, with trauma-informed psychotherapy, we find the roots. How did this person get to be the way they are?
Yeah.
we're not just going to put a sticking plaster on the outside. We're not just going to cut the weeds down in the garden. We're going to get to the root of the dandelion, because if you don't, guess what? The dandelions in your lawn will come up again.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking as somebody who once had to de-dandelion an entire lawn. I turned the lawn over to pull the dandelions out, to get right down to the roots. And that's in effect what we do with EMDR. So EMDR is about case conceptualization, safety, it's got to be safe, and then getting to the roots of how the person got to be the way they are. And then we unpack the thoughts, the feelings, the physical sensations as they are stored in state-specific form, as they were experienced at the time, the car crash. And then we do bilateral stimulation. And then the brain takes over and heals, because that's what it does for a living.
And for anybody watching, that might sound quite, what would you say to somebody who is nervous or novice or never heard of the EMDR? Yeah. How can you and I, who both, you probably far more than me even, sing its praises above most other therapies that we've both ever tried? How could we convince the layperson listening, go for EMDR?
It's a pity it's called EMDR.
It is, isn't it?
Really, because it sounds eye movement, this weird thing you waggle your fingers in front of, and then you're cured. No, it's much more subtle than that.
Yeah.
Francine Shapiro herself, who 30 years ago came out with the protocol, just over 30 years ago, she regretted calling it eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing, because we now know that it's bilateral stimulation, it's sensory input.
Yes.
It can be sounds in each ear, headphones, click, 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 click. It can be buzzes in the hand. It can be taps on the knee. It can be eye movement, where you track the therapist's fingers backhand backwards and forwards across the field of vision, which replicates REM sleep a bit.
Yeah.
What I would say is EMDR done well, and it can be done badly, like all therapies.
Yeah.
And it can be done just protocol-like, just it's done at the client rather than with the client, which is not good news. But the EMDR done well is an amazingly kind and enabling way of dealing with trauma.
Yes.
The analogy I would use is that nobody comes into psychotherapy because of what happened in the past. If you think about it.
Yeah.
No, I'll just say it again.
Yeah.
It's weird to think about it. Nobody comes into psychotherapy because of what happened in the past. They come into psychotherapy because they can't deal in the present with the impact of what happened in the past. It's about the present. So people don't come to psychotherapy saying, I had a really difficult childhood, but I'm fine. No, they might say that, but it's not true, because their relationships are falling apart, they're alcoholics or whatever. But they don't come into psychotherapy if everything's fine, if the past has been appropriately understood, metabolized, and it's in the past. So what we do with attachment-informed EMDR, which is the kind of EMDR I specialize in, is we use the client's intuition and the rich, creative imagination of their nervous system to find how they got to be that way. And I could do a little experiment with you. I could just show you how it works, and people could watch us doing it.
Okay. I'm always up for anything, Mark,
Well, obviously, in the first, you volunteered to be my guinea pig, oink, oink, in front of 30 people or so a few months ago.
I did.
And thank you again.
A good old tear as well.
You had a good old sob, and we did it. I think we did it in 40 minutes flat. It was a little bit.
We did. I think I did say to you at the end that I was a bit like, oh, I've got to get to the end quick, under pressure.
It was, and I'll say on air publicly now, I'm sorry that I rushed you. and the group gave some useful feedback that I was just going a little bit too, it was a bit drag racing. It was a bit flat out, wasn't it? You could smell the rubber.
Yeah, definitely. Burnt rubber.
Burnt rubber.
Yeah.
But the thing about attachment-informed EMDR is we understand that the presenting issue that the client brings, whether it's the relationships falling apart with their husband, or having a really bad time at work in the relationship with the boss, or they're triggered by their children.
Yeah.
Often happens.
Yeah.
Or they've just moved house, or they're having nightmares, or they're obsessive compulsive behavior, whatever it is. If it's not purely organic,
Yeah.
whatever it is, we're curious as clinicians. How did you get to be this way? So what we do is we intuit and we explore, and we take a bit of a case history, we trauma history. So tell me a bit about your life. What was your growing up like? Siblings, parents, how did they get on with each other? What was it like for you growing up? What's it like for you now? We get a feeling and a sense for them. You know how it is, Lou.
I know.
Psychotherapists, what you get a feeling when you've been doing this for a while. You really do tune in, don't you?
Yeah.
To sort of, oh yeah, I think I get it.
Yeah.
And then we, in the EMDR that I do, we set up safety and a whole bunch of resources. So we fire up the creative imagination. So I get you to imagine, say you're my client, I get you to imagine a really nice, safe place, a special place, a calm, peaceful place in your imagination where you could just go and, it's just there for me. Mine's a beach in Thailand.
Mine's a beach in the Maldives.
There you go. Yeah. And I know 9 out of 10 cats prefer a beach.
Yeah, yeah. Always.
It is extraordinary. There's usually a beach, but it might be a mountainside, a beautiful garden, somewhere often, usually in nature.
Yes.
And then what we do is we get them to, these days online, we do it with the butterfly hug. And shall I show how the butterfly works? Take your thumbs like that. No, I do it like this these days. Take your thumbs like that. That's it.
No, I'm not going to really embarrass myself.
That's it.
I can't even do that.
And then you put your hands against your chest like that, and then the fingertips just below the collarbone.
Okay.
Just below the collarbone here, so you can press into the heart chamber. Can you feel that collarbone across? Assume you've got one. Yeah.
I have.
And
I have.
it amazes me every time. Every time I do this, I think, we're all the same.
I know.
We've all got collarbones. We're all products of evolution.
Some of them
that
are
means,
difficult to find.
that means that our nervous systems deal with trauma in the same basic way.
Yeah.
Because we're products of evolution. That's your transpersonal bit. So here, this is the butterfly hug. Tap, 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 tap.
I quite like it there, actually. I've been doing it higher up with people.
I used to do it like that.
Yeah.
But this is lovely. You hook the thumbs together. And
that is nicer.
Yeah. And so I'd get you to, so Lou, just pause the tapping at the moment. Just hold on a moment, close your eyes. Just imagine somewhere really lovely. Let's say your beach in the Maldives. We've already talked about the place. So just imagine yourself there. Notice the time of day, the quality of the light, the weather, the colors, the temperature, the stillness, the noises, what you can hear, what you can touch, the sense of the movement of the air on your skin. There's a dog.
Thanks, Al.
The yap of your dog, the sense of the ground beneath you, any fragrances on the air, any dogs yapping in the background. And then I just say, when you've got a really good sense of that, just gently tap it in. Off you go. Do you want to just tap that in? There you go. Noticing where it feels good in your body and breathing into that space.
Oh,
it works, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We give the client a little bit of time to sort of tune into that. How is that?
Beautiful, especially at the moment without being able to get on a plane anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. This is your coronavirus Maldives.
We won't be getting on a beach soon like that, will we?
We won't. No, you're right. A socially distanced, safe place.
Yes.
And then we do the same tapping in, call this tapping in. This is the bilateral stimulation. This is what makes EMDR distinctive from any other form of therapy. And it's not tapping. It's not the EFT where you do this sort of tapping and, and whatever.
And then.
That's right.
That one.
It doesn't float my boat. EFT does not float my boat.
Yeah.
But this is just a gentle bilateral stimulation. And when I tap here on the right-hand side, it sends a signal to my left brain.
Right.
Because that's how the body works.
Yeah.
When I tap on the left side, it's sending a signal to my right brain.
Okay.
So the brain says, oh, incoming, left, right. So it puts it into a kind of a sort of REM dream
Yes,
state. It's not
lovely.
hypnosis,
Yes.
but it does put the brain into a different state. And there, in that state, the brain will process difficult stuff from the past.
Yeah. Which
And
is amazing, isn't it?
this is the piece that makes EMDR distinctive. And your
Yeah.
question was, what is EMDR? It's a very kind, gentle, especially online, by the way. I love
Yeah.
doing EMDR online.
Yeah, I
How are
agree.
you finding EMDR
I
online?
love it. I love it
Yeah,
even more.
yeah, so do I.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we can use eye movements, and I could show you how they work. Um, and we can do tapping. There's going to be buzzers coming out soon with an
Yeah,
app that you can
amazing.
generate from a distance. You can just tap the table.
Yeah. And I
So,
often get people just to tap the side of their
yeah,
knees.
tap the outside of their knees, as long as it's bilateral, because left brain does thinking, basically. Right brain does feeling, just to sort of, it's a bit of a cliche.
I know, but it's a good one.
You get the brain to work together. The two hemispheres of the brain, very, very different, the master and the emissary, to use Ian McGilchrist's terms.
Yes.
And the brain then sort of says, oh my goodness, we've got all this old stuff we've been hanging around with for the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years. Oh my God, we can actually, should we do something?
Yeah.
Hey guys, we can let these things go. So we then, yeah.
Well, I was just intrigued because I know that we've got probably 10 or 15 minutes more. So I was intrigued for you to talk a little bit more about your creation from attachment focused and working with the younger selves to then take it back a step even more,
Yeah.
looking at the intergenerational model within people. I'm fascinated by how you made that journey.
Okay, so just to finish sort of how we set the scene, we then
Yes.
tap in nurturing resources where using creative imagination. They might be a beloved grandmother, they might be Aslan, they
Yeah.
might be a cat, a mummy otter, a polar bear, sort of maternal, if you like, caring creatures, animals, real people, Mrs. Doubtfire, Mary Poppins. It can be whatever people come up with.
Yeah.
And we tap them in, 3 or so of them. We tap
Lovely.
in some protector figures. That
Yes.
might be a samurai warrior. It might be a gladiator. It might be my big brother who, would always be sort of fighting for me. It might be my dad sometimes. I'm a bit careful with family members because they can be
Yeah.
a bit ambivalent.
Yeah.
But it might be a superhero, Superman, the Hulk.
Yeah.
It can be animal, imaginal, dead, alive, historical, contemporary, real, imaginary, all
Okay.
those things, and a wise figure or two. So we use the creative imagination. It's very Jungian,
Yeah, it is.
very, very Jungian.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we tap all of these guys in. So we start the work before we even look at anything that might be getting in the way of you being the person you have the capacity to be. We've got a whole stack of resources
Yeah, which is
tapped in.
lovely, isn't it?
It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And so the way, what we then do in attachment informed EMDR is we do what we call a bridge, where we use the presenting issue. Or shall I just quickly show you? Because the intergenerational EMDR
Yes.
is an extension of this way of working.
Yes.
So it's all about target identification. So we talk about the target. What's the bit in the past that needs to be changed?
Yeah.
You can call it emotional reconstruction plastic surgery. Reconstructive emotional plastic surgery on the past.
Yeah.
We actually change the past, Lou.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you must get that in your experience. Actually, do you want to just is there anything you want to add about your practice at this point?
No. I think
Changing the
this
past.
no, I think this is absolutely brilliant, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head personally.
And you're fine. This is this is not just me making this stuff up.
No. This is me and any other EMDR therapist, and I've got a few as mates who are, it's all predominantly the way that we're working now. A lot of us is EMDR, because it does work.
It's for me, it is the piece that transforms psychotherapy.
I agree.
So I am an EMDR therapist, not just standard protocol out of the book, but it's embracing and including and integrating everything I've ever learned about psychotherapy, person-centered, psychodynamic, creative imagination.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish I had a sand tray. I'd love to work with sand trays.
Yeah.
Whatever form, for therapists watching this, whatever form of therapy you already know, EMDR can integrate with that.
Yeah, I agree with you.
It's basically safety and relationship, firing up the networks with a focus on how did they get to be this way, the old networks, applying bilateral stimulation and ending with safety. The rest is detail.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we do to find what it is that needs to change in the past, we use this bridging. And we use the bridge to find the much younger ego state, the part that is still little Lou or little Mark.
Yes.
In my case, one really big one, being Asperger's, I got bullied at school quite a lot.
Did you?
And I did. It was not much fun, but because people couldn't make sense of me and I couldn't make sense of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my signature experience at school was being called Lucy, age 7.
Oh, God.
I mean, can you imagine?
Oh,
Being called a girl's name, Lou.
no.
I mean, how would you like to be called?
Louis.
Louis.
Awful.
Awful.
Awful. God.
We could smile about it now, but I carried
I know, but at the time, can you imagine? My heart goes out to you.
So I was carrying the shame of that for nearly 60 years before I cleared it.
Oh.
So we bridged from my presenting distress, and I knew this story about being called Lucy. It had sat with me for years. But we bridged from my presenting distress into being 7 on the playground again. And Laurel Parnell, with whom I was doing a demo session in New York 2015, I said, "Oh, Laurel, I've talked about this till the cows come home."
Yeah.
In therapy.
Yes.
But it had never changed. That's the thing. So many people do therapy.
Yeah.
Nothing changes because you just talk about it. EMDR does something about it. So she said, "Okay, let's just stay with this." And so what she did was, I closed my eyes and she said, "Just think of the scene of being called Lucy. What are you feeling? Shame. Where's that happening in your body? In my heart. What's your belief about yourself? I'm less than." Go with that.
Okay.
Tap, 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 tap. Bilateral stimulation.
Yeah.
And I think I had buzzers and headphones. It was in person in New York.
Okay.
And within 10 seconds, Lou, I was absolutely sobbing my heart out.
Oh.
Finally.
Yes.
Finally. And I was nearly 65. So this is 58 years late. And finally, I was able to feel the emotions that little 7-year-old felt, but was not able to articulate or tell anybody about. And he sat on them for the following 58 years.
Yeah. Transformational.
And I used, in order to sort the bullies out on the playground, I used Superman and my great-great-uncle, who happened to have founded Nigeria, Lord Lugard.
Amazing.
Who's my great-great-uncle.
Yeah.
And 7-year-olds on the playground, well, they've got nothing to stop. Lord Lugard strode onto that playground and said, "Excuse me, this is going to stop." And from that moment, Lou, the bullying, the internal bullying that was going on, because I'd internalized those bullies.
Yeah, of course.
I felt bullied bullied in situations.
Yeah.
It broke the spell, the magic.
That is
lifted the spell. That's just one example. But so we do this.
It's a lovely example, and I think it's a great example, and I think it's really good to use our own personal examples about it's never too late, number one. Absolutely. I love that fact that we can do it at whatever age, and even if you're in your 50s or 60s or 70s, it doesn't matter. You can still do the work now and have such a transformation.
And I've invented a new term for what one experiences this late in life, when you really realize, and I'm amazed this term isn't more widely understood. The experience I've had with the diagnosis of Asperger's is a mixture of grief, sadness at missed opportunities, broken relationships, misunderstandings, grief, but also relief.
Yeah.
Huge relief.
Yeah.
So the emotion is relief.
That's
relief.
Yeah.
Not bad, eh?
Yeah.
I'm amazed that that isn't a formal
I think there's a book in it.
I think I am in the process of preparing to write a book.
Yes.
About all of this. Anyway, but the intergenerational, you asked about the intergenerational because we're rapidly coming to the end of our time. Basically, all we do, given that I'm working with my clients with imagination,
Yes.
My 7-year-old is not literally on the playground of the Fulmerston Primary School in North Norfolk in 1957. That 7-year-old is still alive in my imagination.
Yeah.
It's only an imagination anymore. It's a memory. It's a memory circuit, a dysfunctional memory network, to use Shapiro's language.
Yeah.
Now I am also carrying the dysfunctional memory networks of my family system.
Yeah.
Possibly transmitted down the line epigenetically.
Yeah.
But definitely behaviorally, culturally, in narrative form, family stories, just how my mother has been with me, how my father has been with me. So I talk about the 4 levels of trauma. There's level 1 trauma, which is the bad stuff that happened to you.
Right.
Car accident, rape,
Yeah.
parental divorce, bad stuff.
Yeah.
Then there's level 2 trauma, which is the absence of repair internally. So how it sits with me and the patterns I learned in childhood, how to deal with distress. So somebody might have been sexually abused by their brother age 6. That's a level 1 trauma. But the worst thing is that when they tried to tell their mother, they were
Yeah.
sent to their bedroom and told to stop making things up. And actually, that's worse than the abuse,
I agree.
because it's the absence of relational repair, of attachment repair. It's an attachment wound.
Yeah.
Then the level 3 trauma is the introject, is mother's stuff or father's stuff. This isn't mine, it's me mother's.
Yes.
I watched her doing this. My mother was desperately anxious, so I became anxious. It's not my anxiety, it's hers.
Yeah.
I learned from her to be anxious in the world because she was. And then the level 4 trauma, which is the true intergenerational. So if you like, the mother's introject, you can do EMDR on the mother. And I actually imagine I get the client to take their little self out of the situation, to bring the mother in, and then the adult client is my interpreter,
Right.
and conveys to me what's going on with their mother or father. And I, in their imagination, do EMDR on the mother.
Brilliant.
And I get the mother to bridge back into her childhood, or the father into his childhood. How did he get to be that way? And it is amazing. Since the training, have you used it, Lou, yourself?
I've used it once or twice, but I must admit I want to come back and do more training. And
I'm doing a part 2. I'm doing a part 2 in 2.5 weeks' time. Come and join us.
Okay, I'd love to. Yes.
Friday,
Because I
Saturday,
think,
online.
okay, because it's
Space.
so powerful. I will definitely be up for that.
You get to practice it. You get to really practice it in triads.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, because also I've witnessed it personally, and how powerful it is.
We went into your mum's childhood, didn't we? Do you
did.
remember what it was?
Yes,
What the
we
story
did.
was?
We did mums, and we ended up with my grandmother Peggy in Scotland, in Jedburgh.
Wow.
So I don't know whether you remember the story at all, but my mum was the Barnardo's kid.
Oh yeah.
Who was left in a children's home by her grandmother.
Yeah.
And then they never met. So not until mum was, I don't know, 20s or 30s. So I had all of that narrative, which you so brilliantly worked with.
Yeah. And the extraordinary thing is, if you understand that as a kind of spell that's cast, it's not kind of an evil spell that's external to us. It's just a story that's got stuck in the system unconsciously.
Yes.
And we retell the story. We find the story and the feelings that are associated with it, because I think you had quite a lot of them, didn't you?
Just a few.
Just a few.
So for anybody watching too that's a therapist, that's not a layperson, they can find you on EMDR Focus and all the trainings and the EMDR trainings. And
at Braynework, BRAYNE work, braynework.com. So my psychotherapy website is braynework.com.
Okay.
My EMDR training website and supervision website is emdrfocus.com.
Okay. And just lastly, if we've got time, what do you think now is the future of trauma therapy and trauma work, and the way that we're going to be working as trauma therapists and helping people out there who have got trauma? Is there anything that you see, both for your own career and where you want to go now, but also for people in general in our field? How do you see it kind of operating? Things are shifting, aren't they?
Say it again?
Things are shifting quite a lot.
Things are shifting. I see trauma, an understanding of trauma in the context in which we've discussed it here, bad things that happen that haven't been metabolized, that have got stuck in the system,
Yes.
as being the central component of pretty much all psychotherapy
I
and of all diagnoses. I think the DSM-5 and the ICD-11, that thick at the moment, well, DSM-5 is literally that thick. I haven't got it here. But it will be about that thick.
Yeah.
Because if we understand pretty much everything that comes through the door is trauma informed, you find the root of the trauma, you heal that using creative imagination and EMDR style bilateral stimulation, because that's how the brain works. We do it every night in REM sleep.
Yeah.
And you integrate all of these understandings.
Yeah.
And the whole system of mental health and emotional well-being shifts to an understanding of what we call trauma-informed care.
Yes.
And I think it's going to be central to whatever the kind of society that emerges from this the corona pandemic that we're in at the moment. It's a transformational moment for the human species. Will we rise to the challenge? There's the opportunity to, but I fear we won't. I mean, a rather bigger subject. Let's have another webcast on this later.
Yes.
But I think as a species, we've had it.
Yeah.
This is our last century. And a bit like people in a hospice, we can die well.
Yes.
And we can die badly.
Yeah.
And we are being invited as a species, as each individual in our lives, we are invited to die well. The Dalai Lama says, think of your death every day.
Yeah.
And if we prepare for our death appropriately and with insight and compassion and excitement about now, I'm not dead yet. Wow, what a day.
Yes.
We can live our lives to the full.
Yes.
And as a species, as an individual, it's the same thing. So trauma really matters.
Yeah.
And well done you. Well done you for creating this network of trauma thrivers. Because the one thing that comes out of trauma, the most likely outcome from trauma, is it PTSD? Is it depression? Is it anxiety? It's PTG, which is?
Yeah, post-traumatic growth.
There you go.
Yeah. So I'm more optimistic, and I hope that we become a society where we see mental health or addiction or any dysfunction or DSM-5 as a symptom of trauma, and that we see it as a dysregulated nervous system.
That's it.
And that we all start to work collectively and individually on our nervous systems.
Yeah.
And that somehow we pull it back.
Let's hope.
Because I've got to live in optimism.
You're a bit younger than me. You're a lot younger than me. So I can afford to be gloomy.
Yeah, thank you so much, and
My
thank
pleasure,
you
Lou.
for your time. And yes, I'm really hopeful that this will help an awful lot of people,
Good.
as I know that you already do. And I shall see you on the training.
See you on the training. Excellent. Thanks very much. All the very best.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.